Jason stared at the door. It was always locked. Always. He lived in the flat for 6 months. He had never seen it open. Not even once. The landlord said to just ignore it. He called it Anna's room. But Anna was never there. Jason never saw anyone go in. He never saw anyone come out. The door was old and brown. It had a big, rusty keyhole. And now, for the first time, it was slightly ajar. A thin slice of darkness peeked out, inviting him in. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine, a little thrill of fear mixed with an unstoppable curiosity that pulled him forward. His feet moved before his brain could protest. He walked slowly, quietly down the narrow hallway. The floorboards didn't even creak. It was as if the whole flat was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do. Why was it open now, after all this time? Maybe the landlord had finally opened it for cleaning. Maybe Anna had come back. But there were no sounds, no lights, just a deep, unnatural silence that seemed to swallow all noise from the street outside. Jason's heart started to thump against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet hall. He had to know what was inside. He just had to. He reached the door. His hand trembled as he pushed it. The old wood groaned softly, a low, mournful sound that echoed in the stillness. A smell drifted out. It was musty and stale, like a place that had been sealed away from the world for 100 years. It smelled like dust and something else. Something sweet but wrong. He peered into the darkness, his eyes struggling to adjust. The room was a black square, a void in the middle of his home. He took a hesitant step inside, the feeling of being watched making the hairs on his arms stand up straight. The air inside was thick and cold. It was much colder than the rest of the flat, a sudden drop in temperature that felt like stepping into a freezer. He fumbled for a light switch on the wall, his fingers sliding against the cool, smooth paint. He couldn't find one. The room was meant to be dark. It wanted to be dark. He took another step, deeper into the blackness. His fear was growing, turning into a heavy weight in his stomach. But his curiosity was stronger. It was a powerful urge, a whisper in his mind telling him to keep going, to see the secret the room had kept for so long. Jason's eyes slowly began to make out shapes in the gloom. The only light came from the hallway behind him, casting long, spooky shadows across the floor. The room was almost empty. There was no bed, no desk, just a thick layer of dust covering everything, sparkling faintly in the dim light. It looked like no one had lived here for a very, very long time. In the center of the room, there was a single solitary object. It was a high-backed wooden chair. It was turned away from him, facing the far wall. It looked lonely and strange sitting there all by itself. He could see someone was sitting in it. A figure. It was perfectly still. A dark shape against the darker wall. It had to be Anna. Who else could it be? She was just sitting there, staring at the blank wall. Maybe she was sleeping? Or meditating? Jason felt a small wave of relief. It was just a person, nothing to be scared of. But why was she sitting in the dark? Why didn't she answer when he opened the door? The silence in the room was heavy, pressing in on him from all sides. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a waiting silence. He cleared his throat. The small sound was swallowed by the room. "Anna?" he called out softly. His voice sounded small and weak. There was no reply. The figure did not move, not a twitch, not a single tiny motion. He took another step closer, his shoes making no sound on the dusty floorboards. "Anna, are you okay?" he asked, a little louder this time. Still nothing. The stillness was starting to feel wrong. It was unnatural. People breathe, people shift in their seats. This figure was as still as a statue carved from stone. He was only a few feet away now. He could see the person more clearly. Long dark hair spilled over the back of the chair. The person was wearing a simple old-fashioned dress. He reached out a hand, intending to tap her on the shoulder, to wake her up, to make sure she was all right. The closer he got, the colder the air became. A deep, bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the weather. He could feel his own breath misting in front of his face. He hesitated, his hand hovering in the air. Something was very, very wrong here. Jason took a deep breath and moved to the side of the chair. He had to see her face. He had to know. He peered around the tall back of the chair, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. What he saw made his blood run cold. It was a girl. Her eyes were wide open. They were staring straight ahead at the wall, but they weren't seeing anything. They were glassy and black like two polished stones. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and stretched tightly over her cheekbones. Her mouth was a thin, straight line. She wasn't breathing. He watched her chest, her shoulders. There was no movement at all. She was like a doll. A life-sized, terrifying doll left forgotten in a dusty room. A scream was caught in his throat. He wanted to run, to get out of there as fast as he could, but his feet were frozen to the floor. He couldn't look away from her face. It was the face from a nightmare. Her expression was completely blank, but he felt a terrible sense of menace coming from her, an ancient coldness that seemed to suck all the warmth out of the room and out of him. Then she moved. Her head turned. It didn't turn like a normal person's head. It rotated slowly, mechanically, with a faint, dry, crackling sound, like old twigs snapping. Her glassy black eyes swiveled in their sockets until they were locked on him. Jason felt a pure, primal terror grip him. He was paralyzed, caught in her dead stare. He opened his mouth to scream, but only a choked gasp came out. This was not Anna. This could not be a person. It was something else, something horrible. The thing in the chair opened its mouth. A sound came out. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a human sound. It was a low, long hiss, like air leaking from a punctured tire, but with a strange, wet, gurgling noise mixed in. The sound vibrated through the floor and up Jason's legs. That was it. The spell was broken. Jason finally screamed, a raw, terrified sound. He scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet. He turned and ran, his mind blank with fear, fleeing from the thing in the chair and the awful hissing sound that followed him out of the room. Jason didn't stop running until he was back in his own room. He slammed the door shut, his hands shaking so violently he could barely turn the lock. He leaned against the door, gasping for breath, his heart feeling like it was going to explode out of his chest. He could still hear that sound, that terrible, inhuman hissing. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the image of her face was burned into his mind. The pale skin, the black, empty eyes, the slow cracking turn of her head. He slid down the door until he was sitting on the floor, pulling his knees to his chest. He stayed there for what felt like hours, trembling in the dark. He was too scared to turn on the light, too scared to move. He just listened. He listened for footsteps in the hallway. He listened for the hissing sound to start again, but there was nothing, only the pounding of his own blood in his ears. The flat had returned to its deep, unnatural silence. Was it a dream, a hallucination? No, it was real. He knew it was real. The coldness he felt was real. The terror was real. And Anna, or whatever that thing was just down the hall. Then he saw it, a thin slip of white paper sliding under his door. It moved silently, pushed from the other side. Jason held his breath, his eyes wide with fear. Someone was out there, right outside his door. He watched, frozen, as the note came to a stop in the middle of the floor. Who was it? Was it her? Had she followed him? He didn't want to touch it. He didn't want to know what it said, but he couldn't stop himself. He crawled slowly across the floor, his body shaking, and reached out a trembling hand for the paper. He unfolded the note. The writing was messy, like a child's scroll. The letters were crooked and uneven. There were only 5 words on the page, 5 simple words that made his blood freeze solid in his veins. The note said, "We will live together now." The next morning, the landlord came by to collect the rent. He noticed Jason's door was wide open, his room empty. All his things were gone. The landlord shrugged and walked down the hall. He stopped at Anna's door. It was locked again, tight and secure, and from behind the wood, he could hear a faint familiar humming sound.